They laughed the loudest right after she dropped the mop bucket. It wasn't an accident. Haley, one of the younger nurses on the day shift, had been walking past the supply closet when she stuck out her foot just enough. Just enough to clip the wheel. The gray water spread across the freshly cleaned linoleum in a wide, slow arc, and for a second, the hallway of Ridgecrest Private Hospital went completely quiet. Then the laughter started. Oh no. That was Jordan, leaning against the nurse's station counter, with a coffee cup in her hand, grinning behind the rim. Guess you'll have to start over. The woman in the blue cleaning uniform didn't say a word. She was 63 years old, short, with reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked hair. Her name tag read E. Foster, in plain block letters. She looked at the spreading puddle, then bent down to retrieve the mop, and began again. I honestly don't know how she does it, Haley said, not even bothering to lower her voice. Like, at her age, shuffling around this whole floor. It takes her forever. They should have a mandatory retirement age for this kind of thing. Jordan said it's a liability. They walked off, heels clicking, still laughing. Eleanor Foster watched them go. She didn't say anything. She never did. She just wrung out the mop and started on the puddle. It had started 6 weeks earlier, when Eleanor first showed up for the Monday morning shift. She hadn't told anyone who she was. She'd applied through the standard agency intake the way everyone else did, listed her previous experience as light commercial cleaning, and shown up on her first day with a pair of sturdy shoes and a thermos of Earl Grey. The charge nurse on duty, a stout, efficient woman named Brenda who Eleanor had liked immediately, had given her a brief tour of the wing, handed her a schedule, and that was that. Eleanor was not, in any ordinary sense, a cleaner. She was the founder of the Elspeth Foster Group, a healthcare real estate trust that owned 42 facilities across 4 provinces, including Ridgecrest Private Hospital. She had built the company over 31 years, starting with a single long-term care home in Sudbury that she and her late husband Alan had mortgaged everything to buy. The company now employed over 4,000 people. She sat on the board of 3 hospitals and had just been named to the Federal Advisory Panel on Elder Care. She had also, in the past 8 months, received 11 separate complaints from Ridgecrest staff members, housekeeping, dietary, patient transport, describing what they called a hostile environment centered on a core group of nurses and supervisors on the 3rd floor. HR had investigated twice. Nothing changed, so Eleanor had done what she sometimes did when the paperwork wasn't telling her the whole story. She came to see for herself. The name on her badge was real, Eleanor Foster. She'd never hidden that, but the administrative staff at Ridgecrest knew her only as a signature on documents, a name on letterhead, a voice on quarterly calls. To the nurses on 3 North, she was just an old woman with a mop. She was fine with that. The 3rd floor wing at Ridgecrest wasn't a bad place. By the numbers, patient satisfaction scores were strong. The rooms were clean. Eleanor made sure of that personally, 4 days a week. The medical outcomes were well within provincial benchmarks. But there was something underneath the surface numbers. Eleanor had felt it on her first day, before anyone had said a word to her. It was in the way a group of nurses went quiet when one of the dietary aides walked past. It was in the way a patient transport worker named Clement kept his eyes down when he navigated through the station, even when he'd done nothing wrong. It was in the way laughter could appear suddenly and then cut off just as fast, and nobody would explain why. Eleanor had grown up poor in Cape Breton. She'd spent 3 years cleaning offices before she'd saved enough to take a business course. She knew exactly what that kind of laughter meant. She'd heard it before, directed at her, and she'd learned then that the people who did it rarely understood what they were actually saying about themselves. She mopped. She emptied the biohazard bins. She restocked the supply carts, and she watched. Haley Drummond was 26, fast-tracked through her nursing designation, and seemed to believe that being competent at her job gave her license to be unkind to everyone else around her. She was the one who'd kicked the mop bucket. She was also the one who had, on Eleanor's third day, told Clement to try not to take up the whole hallway when he was transporting a patient on a gurney. The only option being the middle of the hallway, as any reasonable person would understand. Jordan Pelletier was different. She wasn't cruel in the sharp, visible way. She was the type who laughed along, who made the slightly too clever comment, who positioned herself just close enough to the mean thing without ever technically saying it herself. In some ways, Eleanor found that harder to watch. The third one, the one who troubled her most, was the ward supervisor, a man named Tyler Voss. He was 34, wore a tight-fitting blazer over his scrubs like he was heading to a brunch after his shift, and managed the floor with the particular skill of someone who was excellent at not being in the room when things went wrong. If Haley was the accelerant, Tyler was the oxygen supply. He set the tone and then stepped back from it, which meant that when HR had come looking, they'd found no direct evidence pointing to him. Eleanor had worked with people like Tyler Voss her entire career. She knew exactly how to handle them. She just needed a little more time. 5 weeks in, something shifted. It started on a Tuesday morning in early March. Eleanor had arrived at 6:30 to get ahead of the supply restock, and she was in the middle of cleaning the family waiting room at the end of the hall when she heard someone crying. Not loudly. The quiet, controlled kind of crying that people do when they're trying not to be heard. She found the source in the small break room around the corner. A young woman in her mid-20s sat at the table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, her hands wrapped around it like she'd forgotten it was there. Her ID badge read Tamsin Oduya, patient care aide. Eleanor had noticed Tamsin over the past few weeks. She was quiet, diligent, the kind of person who refilled the paper in the printer without being asked. She was also, Eleanor had noticed, someone that Haley had taken a specific interest in targeting. "You all right?" Eleanor asked. Tamsin looked up quickly, the way people do when they've been caught. "Fine, sorry, I'm fine." Eleanor set down her supplies and poured herself a cup from the pot on the counter, the communal coffee that was always slightly burned, but she'd never complained about it. She sat down across from Tamsin, not too close. "You don't have to be fine," she said. It took a few minutes, but Tamsin told her. The performance review had come out the previous afternoon. Tamsin had been with Ridgecrest for 2 years, had never received a single formal complaint, had a patient satisfaction score that was consistently in the top quartile of the unit, but in the review, signed off by Tyler Voss, she had been rated meets expectations across the board, with a note that she struggles with initiative. She had not received the raise that came with the next pay band. Haley had, 3 months earlier. "I don't understand," Tamsin said, not accusatory, genuinely confused. "I don't know what else I'm supposed to do." Eleanor looked at her for a moment. Then she said, quietly, "Can I ask, is this the first time this has happened?" Tamsin shook her head. "Has anyone looked at your file? HR?" "I've thought about it." Tamsin's voice dropped. "But I don't want to make trouble." Eleanor understood that calculation. She'd done it herself once. "You're not making trouble," she said carefully. "You're making a record. There's a difference." She didn't say anything else. She didn't make promises she wasn't ready to keep yet. She picked up her supplies and went back to work. But she had heard everything she needed to hear. On Eleanor's last official day as a cleaner, though nobody knew it was her last day, Haley made a comment at the nurse's station loud enough to carry down the hall. "I'm just saying, at some point it becomes a safety issue. She's so slow. What if there's an emergency and she's in the way with her cart?" There were 4 people standing at the station. Nobody said anything to disagree. Eleanor was around the corner, outside the supply closet, perfectly still. Her hand rested on the cart handle. She looked at the window at the end of the corridor, the one that overlooked the courtyard, where a few bare silver maples were just beginning to think about budding. She thought about Alan, who had died 4 years ago, in a room 3 floors above, where she was standing right now. She thought about the woman who had cleaned his room, quietly, efficiently, with more dignity than most people gave her credit for, and how Alan had always made a point of learning the name of every person who came into his room. "That's how you know what kind of person someone is," he used to say. "Not how they treat the people above them. How they treat the people they think don't matter." She let go of the cart handle. She walked to the nurse's station. All four of them looked up. Haley had the particular expression of someone who assumed they were about to be asked for something they didn't want to provide. "Have a good evening," Eleanor said pleasantly. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the administrative floor, and she went to work. The meeting request went out the following Thursday morning, sent from the office of the Regional Director of Operations Mandatory, third floor staff. 10 a.m. Attendance expected from all supervisory-level employees. Nobody thought much of it. These things came and went. At 9:55, Eleanor walked into the Ridgecrest boardroom wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a leather portfolio under her arm. She set it on the table. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher. She sat down at the head of the table and waited. At 10 o'clock, the door opened. Haley Drummond came in first, already talking to Jordan about something. She stopped when she saw Eleanor. Really stopped. The kind of full-body halt that happens when the brain can't reconcile what the eyes are seeing. Sorry, Haley said. "I think we might have the wrong room." "You have the right room," Eleanor said. "Please sit down." Tyler Voss came in behind them, blazer immaculate, and stopped in almost exactly the same way. The room filled over the next 2 minutes. Charge nurses, supervisors, the ward administrator. They sat in varying states of confusion, looking from Eleanor to each other and back again. It was Brenda, the charge nurse Eleanor had liked from day one, who recognized her first. Eleanor saw it happen. A slight widening of the eyes, a stillness that moved through Brenda's expression like a ripple. But Brenda didn't say anything. She sat down and folded her hands on the table. Eleanor opened her portfolio. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Eleanor Foster. Some of you know that name as it appears on your employment documentation. Others of you know me as the woman who cleaned this floor for the past 6 weeks." She paused for exactly 1 second. "You are all correct." The silence in the room was total. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She had spent 30 years making difficult decisions in boardrooms, and she had learned that the quieter you stayed, the more carefully people listened. "I want to be direct with you about why I'm here and what happens next," she said. "I came to this floor because I had received a pattern of formal complaints from support staff over the course of 8 months. I came personally because 2 HR investigations had not resolved what I was hearing. I spent 6 weeks as a cleaner on this unit, and I am satisfied that I now understand the situation accurately." She looked around the table. "I also want to say this clearly. The majority of people in this room are not part of what I'm about to address. Most of you do your jobs with professionalism and care, and I've watched you do it. What I observed on this floor was not the culture of this unit. It was a subset of individuals who set a tone that others either followed or felt unable to challenge. That distinction matters to me, and it will matter in what follows." She turned a page in her portfolio. "Tyler Voss," she said. He stiffened. "Effective today, your position as ward supervisor is under formal review, pending an HR process that will begin this afternoon. You are relieved of supervisory responsibilities until that review is complete." She looked at him steadily. "You may remain employed at Ridgecrest in a non-supervisory capacity during the review period, or you may choose to resign. That decision is yours. I'd encourage you to speak with the HR director before you make it." Tyler opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I have rights under the collective." "You do," Eleanor said. "They'll be fully respected. HR will explain the process." She moved on. Haley Drummond. Haley had gone a particular shade of pale that Eleanor recognized. The specific color of someone who has just understood, too late, what they've done. "You'll be receiving a formal written warning today, the terms of which will be outlined by HR. It will be placed in your permanent file. Eleanor let that land. You are also talented at your job. Whether you keep this position depends entirely on what you decide to do with that talent going forward. She did not look at Jordan. She didn't need to. Jordan was already staring at the table. There are 2 more matters, Eleanor said. She flipped a page. Tamsin Oduya. Tamsin was near the back of the room, very still. Your most recent performance review has been audited and revised. The assessment of meets expectations has been amended to reflect a documented performance record that is, in fact, exceptional. The corresponding pay adjustment will appear in your next pay period, effective from the date of the original review. There was a soft, involuntary exhale from somewhere in the room. Additionally, Eleanor said, the patient care lead position, which has been posted internally for 3 months without being filled, will be offered to you this afternoon. You are not obligated to accept it, but it's being offered. Tamsin did not cry. She pressed her lips together very briefly and nodded. Eleanor closed the portfolio. I want to be honest with you about something, she said. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came because people who do necessary work were being treated as though their dignity was conditional, as though it had to be earned by the kind of job they held. That's not the organization I built, and it's not the organization I intend to leave behind. She stood. Will be available from 11 o'clock. Please use the rest of the morning to consider the information you've received. She picked up her portfolio and walked to the door. She stopped once, with her hand on the frame, and turned back to the room. Not for drama. Because she had one more thing she wanted to say, and she'd learned that the thing you say last is the thing people remember. There was a man named Clement on this floor. Patient transport. He's been with Ridgecrest for 9 years. She looked at no one and everyone. He did his job beautifully every single day and was made to feel small for it. He put in a transfer request 2 weeks ago. I approved it. He's going to be working at our Oakdale facility as of Monday, in a role I think he'll find more suitable. She paused. I wanted you to know that he landed well and that I noticed. Then she left. The weeks that followed were, in Eleanor's experience, the kind that quietly rearranged things. Tyler Voss chose to resign. He sent a brief email that managed to avoid acknowledging anything specific, and Eleanor thought that was probably for the best. Acknowledgement wasn't something that could be forced, and she had no interest in it anyway. Haley Drummond stayed. Eleanor didn't know yet whether that would prove to be the right call. But she'd seen the expression on Haley's face in the boardroom. Not the performative shame someone puts on for an audience, but the real, interior kind. The kind that comes from suddenly seeing yourself clearly for the first time. Eleanor had been wrong about people before. She had also been right. She was willing to leave room for the possibility that Haley might surprise her. Jordan Pelletier had come to Eleanor's office 11 days after the meeting, by appointment, having emailed the administrative assistant and waited her turn. She'd sat across from Eleanor for about 3 minutes without saying anything particularly articulate. Then she had said, I never kicked anything, but I laughed, and I'm not sure that's better. Eleanor had looked at her for a moment. No, she said. It isn't. Okay, Jordan said. She stood up, smoothed her scrubs, and left. Eleanor thought that was probably one of the more honest conversations she'd had in months. Tamsin accepted the patient care lead position. She'd asked for 48 hours to think about it, which Eleanor respected enormously. On her first full day in the new role, she had quietly reorganized the supply rotation on the floor so that the external cleaning staff weren't having to restock the carts twice. Nobody had asked her to do it. She'd just seen that it could be done more sensibly, and she had done it. Eleanor heard about it from Brenda, who mentioned it in passing during a walkthrough. She's going to be very good, Brenda said. I know, Eleanor said. Eleanor drove back to her office in Ottawa on a Friday afternoon in late March, with the windows down a little, despite the cold, because she liked the smell of the air in late winter, the particular flat, metallic scent of snow that was almost finished. The radio was on low. She passed a Tim Hortons and thought about stopping. Then didn't. She thought about Alan. She thought about the way he used to say that the best thing you could do for any organization was to spend some time invisible in it. You learn things invisible that you never learn from the top of the ladder. He had meant it practically, as a management principle. But she'd always thought there was something else in it, too. Something about the value of moving through a space as yourself, without your title preceding you, just to see what the world actually looks like from the floor. She knew what it looked like. She had the sore back to prove it. She also had the memory of Tamsin's face, in the break room on that Tuesday morning in February, hands around a cup of cold tea, trying not to be heard. And then, 4 weeks later, in that same boardroom, not crying, just pressing her lips together and nodding once, with the particular composure of someone who had decided, long ago, to hold themselves together, and was now, finally, being told it had been worth it. That, Eleanor thought, as the highway opened up past the city limits, was the part nobody saw in the numbers. The part that didn't show up in HR reports or satisfaction scores or quarterly benchmarks. The part that was the whole point. She pressed the button on the steering wheel and called her assistant to let her know she was 3 hours out. Then she turned the radio up slightly and drove north.